Welcome back, everybody. James Krasnerick is now here live with who he thinks will advance to Super Bowl 48 in New York. It's kind of funny because, at the start of the playoffs, there really was no real set consensus out of the NFC for who was going to make the Super Bowl. And I'm going to start there first this time, unlike my last two segments. Because although teams like San Francisco, who made the Super Bowl and almost won it, will have an offseason with their quarterback, Colin Kaepernick, as the starter to work with, made incredible strides. You got another team like Atlanta, who won the most games of anybody in the NFL this year, tied with Denver, and they deserve to be fairly recognized just as well. But I'm going with a team that I don't think a lot of people really have given enough credit to, and I'm going to say that the 2013 NFC champion will be the Seattle Seahawks. Yes, they're a young team. Yes, they're an inexperienced playoff team. Yes, they have Pete Carroll as their coach. But if you take away those three things, and now that they've been in a few playoff games through the past 3 years, this team's poised to make a run. I mean, they had the largest point differential in the league this year. They won their games by plus 10 per game, at least. Fifth in turnover differential. In none of the four defensive categories they finished outside the top 10, and three of them they were inside the top 6, including first in points allowed. Oh, by the way, you got a Pro Bowl quarterback in Russell Wilson who's pretty damn good, tying NFL's record for most rookie touchdown passes. And you got Marshawn Lynch, all-pro running back, almost 1,600 yards and 11 touchdowns. Excuse me. Seattle's a very balanced team on offense. I mean, you wouldn't think that with the hard running of Lynch, but, you have Sidney Rice, you have Golden Tate. You have even other guys that don't many people talk about, like Zach Miller, who tore up the Falcons in the divisional playoffs. You have Doug Baldwin, who is a very, very good player. Very, very underrated player in that team. Can make some big catches. 3 touchdowns this year. But the offensive line is what makes this team go. When you look at the way the offensive line played, they had 2 guys go to the Pro Bowl and one, Max Unger, first-team All-NFL at center. Oh, by the way, none of the guys really on offense they are very, very stout. They're very, in terms of neutralizing pass rushers. There wasn't really one team in the NFL that really put pressure on Russell Wilson or was able to bottle up Marshawn Lynch that much this year. They've got a very, very, very underrated football team up there. But with Seattle, it's the defense. Chris Clemons should be back off his torn ACL, the man who led the Seahawks in sacks the last 3 years. Very, very underrated pass rusher. You got Bruce Irvin waiting in the wings. He'll be the second-year guy out of West Virginia. You've got Bobby Wagner, who'll be a second year. He went to Utah State, was voted second-team All-NFL. But, of course, that's secondary for Seattle is what makes that team go. The Legion of Boom is what they call themselves. I'll give Seattle credit for this. I mean, when Pete Carroll came to Seattle during the 2010 season, I mean, he inherited an utterly talentless football team. They'd just come off a 5-11 year, which gave up 7th most points in the league. Their defense was abysmal. I mean, the year before Pete Carroll made it to Seattle, they gave up 30 or more points in 6 games. Those aren't the kind of numbers you're seeing out of this unit anymore. I mean, you know how many teams last year scored 30 points on the Seattle Seahawks, including playoffs? Only one, Atlanta. And if you watch the way that this team plays at home, such a good team. They really are. I mean, you get them at Quest Field. If you have to play them at Quest Field, that's a losing proposition for just about anybody. Because the way the crowd is, they're overcaffeinated, they're nuts. They root from the game's start to game's end as loud as they can for the Seahawks. It's deafening up there. I mean, how many times have teams gone up there and just committed so many procedure penalties because they couldn't hear the snap count? That just goes to show you enough about how well that crowd influences a football game. And the Seattle Seahawks had some big wins this year with some pretty good teams. I mean, let's not forget, they beat the Redskins in the playoffs. They pounded the Niners in the second and last week of the season. They did beat Green Bay, so whatever you want about how they did, they still beat Green Bay. They beat New England. They beat Chicago in Chicago. They had a 3-game stretch in December where they scored an average of 50 points a game. They can win any way they have to. And I think another year with Russell Wilson to develop, Marshawn Lynch to run, and that defense to shut down other offenses, that's going to be a very fearsome team next year that no one wants to play. I did mention one team out of the AFC next year. That I think had a chance. Well, at least I said one team last year that played well. That was one of the better teams in its conference, and a team that tied with Atlanta. And that was the Denver Broncos. My pick out of the AFC to represent in Super Bowl 48. Now, you can make a case for New England. You know, they advanced further. They beat the Broncos this year. They've got a more high-powered offense. You can make a case for Houston. Again, they beat Denver too. And, you know, they've got a very good running game and maybe as good of a defense as Denver. You could say Baltimore, they're coming off the defending champ, even though I think with the loss of Ray Lewis and possibly more likely Ed Reed, that's going to be a big leadership blow to that team. But seriously, what team in the NFL has as few holes as Denver? Let's put it this way. I think this team was the best team that Peyton Manning ever played on, period. And he had two teams in Indianapolis that went 13-0 to start a season, one 14-0, and two teams that made a Super Bowl. One team that won one. Here's what I don't get. Why Peyton Manning is a mental block in the playoffs. Let's not forget, when 2006, when he won his only ring, it was the defense that carried his ass through the playoffs. If the defense doesn't make the jump from horrendous to still curtain-like from the regular season to the playoffs that year, Colts don't do shit. They probably would have gone out in the second round when they went to Baltimore. But Peyton Manning's going to have to play better in the playoffs than he did this past year. I mean, he threw two big interceptions against Baltimore, you know? One was returned for a touchdown, and one that allowed the Ravens to kick the winning field goal in overtime. If you were to put a guy in there like a Tom Brady who's a playoff winner, or a Ben Roethlisberger with that playoff experience, I don't think they'd have choked, because Peyton has a habit of choking. But for all the badness about Peyton Manning, I got to talk about now why I think this team's going to the Super Bowl. and simple. Because like Seattle, they might be the most complete team in their conference, offense and defense. They were in the top 4 in every one of the 4 defensive categories, the 4 major ones: rush, pass, total yards, total points allowed. Again, you had the all-pro quarterback in Peyton Manning, who, when he plays well, still one of the best in the league. A running game that, when it gets its big guns going, such as Noshawn Moreno and even Willis McGahee, when those guys are able to run the football well and set up Peyton Manning, it's tough to stop a team that can beat you 2 different ways. And the defense, you have Von Miller, who in his first 2 years in the NFL has been to 2 Pro Bowls and registered 30 sacks. You have Elvis Dumervil on that defensive line, who's also a Pro Bowler, who had a 17-sack season in 2009 and an 11-sack season this year in 2012. They've got depth and they got talent in that defense and an ability to hit the quarterback. If they play as well as they did last year, the defense, they've got a really good chance to make some noise. They just got to shore up the secondary because, I've talked a lot about how bad Flacco is, but he morphed into Joe Montana for that playoff run. And that was the best quarterback that the Broncos had seen for a while. And I don't think they were really prepared for it. If they'd have been playing better players up till then, who knows? Maybe they might have done better. We'll never know. But I look at this Denver team and I say, this is the most complete team offensively, defensively in the conference, and that's why I'm picking them. Hope you guys enjoyed my 3-parter.